This is something I've been wanting to get off my chest for a while. It's one of those stories that you just can't forget, no matter how hard you try. It's been messing with my head for a long time, and I thought maybe writing it down would help. I don't know if anyone's going to believe me, but here it goes anyway. So, I live in this small town. It's quiet, pretty boring most of the time. You know, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and there's not much going on. I've lived here for a few years now in this small house on a regular street. Nothing fancy, just your average neighborhood. Kids ride their bikes up and down the sidewalks, old couples walk their dogs, and people mind their own business for the most part. I liked it here. Or, well, I used to. I don't have many neighbors. There's this older lady across the street who's always tending to her garden and waving at people passing by. Then, there's a family a few houses down with three loud, chaotic kids who scream and run around nonstop. But the people who lived right next door to me, well, I didn't really know them. I didn't think much about them, honestly. It was a couple, a man and a woman. I'd seen them around a few times, but they mostly kept to themselves, and so did I. The guy, though, something about him always gave me a weird vibe. I couldn't put my finger on it. He wasn't tall or muscular or anything intimidating like that, but there was this energy about him that just didn't sit right with me. He'd sometimes look at me in this strange way, like he was sizing me up, even though we never spoke. I'd catch him in his yard, and he'd just stand there, staring. The woman, on the other hand, seemed quiet but nice enough. She'd smile politely if we crossed paths, but that was the extent of our interaction. Everything was normal for the first few months after they moved in. No issues, no noise, no drama. But about 6 months ago, things started to change. At first, it was little things. I'd hear their front door slam shut hard, like someone was in a bad mood, usually late at night. Then there would be this eerie silence afterward. No talking, no TV, nothing. Just quiet. I shrugged it off, thinking they were maybe just night owls or going through a rough patch, but the more I thought about it, the more it felt off. It was the arguing that really started to get to me. I'd hear raised voices through the walls, mostly the guy's. His voice would boom, angry and loud, while hers was softer, trying to calm him down. At first, it wasn't anything crazy, just typical couple fights, I figured. But then it escalated. The yelling became more frequent, almost nightly. It was like clockwork. Around midnight, their voices would cut through the quiet, and it wasn't just yelling anymore. I'd hear things being thrown, heavy thuds, furniture scraping across the floor like someone was being shoved. I didn't know what to do. Should I have called someone? I thought about it, but it's not like they were screaming for help. And, honestly, I didn't want to get involved in their business. People fight, right? Everyone has their rough moments. I figured they'd work it out or break up, like any normal couple going through a rough time. But one night, it got worse. Much worse. I was lying in bed, just about to drift off to sleep, when I heard it again, the yelling. But this time, it was different. The guy's voice was louder, angrier. I could make out his words this time. "You never listen," he shouted over and over again, like a broken record. The woman wasn't yelling back anymore. I couldn't hear her at all. My heart started racing, and I sat up in bed, staring at the wall, listening. Then there was a crash, a loud, unmistakable sound of glass shattering. I jumped out of bed and rushed to my window, trying to see what was happening, but it was too dark. Their lights were off. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. Something was very wrong. I didn't know what to do. Should I go over there? Knock on the door? Call the cops? I felt frozen, like my brain couldn't make a decision. I just stood there at the window, staring into the darkness, hoping the silence would return. And eventually it did. The yelling stopped. The crashing stopped. Everything was quiet again, too quiet. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened. But the next morning, everything seemed normal again. No broken windows, no signs of a struggle. The house looked as quiet and unassuming as ever. I convinced myself that I had imagined it, that it wasn't my place to intervene. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I walked past their house, I felt this gnawing sense of unease, like something was simmering just beneath the surface. It stayed that way for a while, tense but quiet. No more fights, No more crashes. I didn't see the couple for days, maybe even weeks. I started to think they had finally separated, or that one of them had left. But then I heard her again. It wasn't yelling this time, though. It was crying, sobbing. Actually, I was sitting on my couch, watching TV, when I heard this faint sound coming through the wall. It was soft at first, almost like a distant echo, but it got louder. I muted the TV and sat there, listening. The sobs were desperate, broken. Not the kind of crying that comes after a bad day, but the kind that comes when someone's completely falling apart. I felt sick. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't just knock on their door and ask if she was okay, could I? I didn't even know them, but it felt wrong to do nothing. So I decided I'd call the police. Maybe they could do a welfare check or something. But just as I was about to dial, the crying stopped. Like a switch had been flipped. The house was silent again. I stared at my phone, my thumb hovering over the screen, but something held me back. I told myself I'd wait. Maybe it was a one-time thing. Maybe I was blowing it out of proportion. Days passed. No more sounds, no more signs of trouble. I tried to convince myself that everything was fine. But one morning, something strange happened. I was getting ready for work, and as I stepped outside, I saw her, the woman. She was standing on her porch, staring down the street. Her hair was a mess, and she looked pale, like she hadn't slept in days. She didn't seem to notice me, and I almost went over to ask if she was okay, but then the guy appeared. He stepped out behind her, grabbed her arm, not hard, but firm enough, and whispered something in her ear. She nodded, her eyes still fixed on the ground, and they both went back inside. The whole thing was weird, really weird. But again, I said nothing. After that, I barely saw them. The house next door was so quiet it felt abandoned. No more fights, no more arguments, no more broken glass. Just silence. But the kind of silence that felt wrong. The tension was thick, like something was about to snap at any moment. Every time I walked past their house, I got this cold feeling in the pit of my stomach. One day, I noticed a package sitting on their front porch. It had been there for a couple of days, untouched. At first, I didn't think much of it, but as more days passed and the package still sat there, I started to worry. Where were they? Why hadn't they taken it inside? Then, out of nowhere, the package disappeared. Just gone. I figured maybe they'd finally grabbed it, but when I looked closely, I saw footprints in the dirt leading up to their front door. The prints were deep, like someone had been standing there for a long time, waiting. It freaked me out. Weeks went by, and the silence continued. No sign of them. No sounds, no movements. Nothing. But the weirdest part was the feeling I had every time I passed their house. That sense of unease, like something terrible was just beneath the surface, waiting to come out. Then one day, I saw her again. I was out mowing the lawn, and I noticed her standing at the window, watching me. She wasn't waving or smiling. She just stood there, staring. It sent chills down my spine. I stopped the mower and waved, but she didn't move. After a few seconds, she disappeared from the window. I didn't know what to think. What was she trying to tell me? Was she warning me? Was she asking for help? That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about that look on her face, how scared she seemed. Something was seriously wrong, but I didn't know what to do. I was just the guy next door. What could I possibly do to help? The next day, I made up my mind. I had to check on them. I had to knock on their door, even if it made me look like a nosy neighbor. So I walked over, heart pounding, and knocked. Nothing. I knocked again, louder. Still nothing. I stood there for a minute, listening. The house was dead quiet. I thought about leaving, but then I heard something, a faint noise, like someone moving around inside. I knocked one last time, calling out, "Hey, is everything okay in there?" After what felt like forever, the door creaked open just a few inches, and there she was, the woman. But she looked even worse than before. Pale, dark circles under her eyes, hair a mess. She didn't say anything at first, just stared at me through the crack in the door. "Hey, I just wanted to check on you," I said awkwardly. "I haven't seen you around, and I wanted to make sure you're okay." She didn't respond right away, just looked at me with this distant, hollow expression. Then she whispered, "He's sleeping. I can't talk right now." The way she said it, like she was terrified of waking him up, sent chills down my spine. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to help, but I didn't know how. Before I could say anything else, she shut the door, locking it behind her. I went back to my house, feeling more confused than ever. Something was definitely wrong, but what was I supposed to do? Call the cops again? They'd already been there once, and if nothing looked off, they'd just leave. That night, I couldn't sleep again. The whole thing was eating at me. Every time I thought about it, I got this pit in my stomach, like I was missing something important. But what? The next couple of days were quiet again. I didn't see her at the window, didn't hear any sounds from their house. It was like they had vanished. Then, one night, something happened that still haunts me to this day. I was lying in bed, tossing and turning, when I heard a noise outside. It was faint at first, but then I realized it was coming from next door. I sat up, listening. It sounded like someone was struggling to stay quiet. I went to the window and looked out. At first, I didn't see anything. But then, in the shadows near their driveway, I saw her, the woman. She was standing there, looking up and down the street like she was making sure no one was watching. My heart started pounding. She reached into her pocket and pulled something out. It was a phone. She was texting someone, her fingers moving frantically. After a few minutes, she stopped, looked around again, and then slipped back inside the house. I stood there, staring at the spot where she had been, my mind racing. What was she doing? Who was she texting in the middle of the night? Was she trying to get help? If so, why was she being so secretive about it? I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. The next morning, I decided to try one more time to talk to her. I waited until the guy had left for work. Then I went next door and knocked again. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. I was about to leave when I heard a faint noise from inside. It was so quiet, I almost didn't catch it, but it was there. I knocked one last time, calling out, "Hey, are you okay?" The door creaked open, just a crack, and there she was again. But this time, her face was different. She didn't look scared anymore. She looked resigned, like she had given up. "I can't leave," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He won't let me." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "He won't let you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I didn't know what to say. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. "I tried," she said, her voice cracking. "I called the shelter. I reached out to a friend. I even went to the police. But he found out. Every time. I felt sick." "How? How does he know?" She looked down, ashamed. "He's been tracking my phone. Everything I do, everywhere I go. He always knows." I could hardly believe what I was hearing. How could someone live like that, under constant surveillance? I was angry, too. How could this guy control her every move like that? "What about now?" I asked. "He's not here, right? You can leave now." She shook her head. "He'll know. He checks everything." I was at a loss. I wanted to help her, but I didn't know how. "Isn't there some way to get around it?" "There's a window," she whispered, almost like she was afraid the walls were listening. "In the back. He doesn't have cameras there, I think." A spark of hope flickered in her eyes. I latched onto it. "Okay, so when he's gone, you can get out through the window. I'll meet you there and we'll go." She looked at me, her eyes wide, filled with fear and hope. "You'd help me?" "Of course," I said. "We'll figure it out." But just as I was about to make a plan with her, we heard it, the distant rumble of an engine. Her face went pale. "He's home," she whispered, panic flashing in her eyes. I stepped back, not wanting to be caught standing at her door. "I'll come back later. We'll figure this out, okay?" She nodded, her hands shaking as she slowly closed the door. I rushed back to my house, my heart racing. I watched from my window as the guy pulled into the driveway, completely unaware of what was happening right under his nose. That night, I didn't sleep. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how to get her out, how to outsmart this guy. But I knew it wasn't going to be easy. He was watching her every move. The next morning, I checked on her again, and we quickly devised a plan to escape through the window when the time was right. But as the days dragged on, my anxiety grew. The tension was unbearable. I had no idea what would happen next, but I couldn't stand by and watch her suffer any longer. Then, one night, I heard it again, the shouting. I rushed to the window and saw them in the driveway, the guy yelling at her, his face twisted in rage. He grabbed her by the arm, and that's when I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I had to do something. I grabbed my phone and called the police. The officers arrived quickly, and after some tense moments, they arrested the guy and took him away. The woman was taken to safety, bruised and broken, but alive. I don't know where she is now, but I hope she's safe. The house next door is empty now, but I'll never forget what happened there. It's the kind of story that stays with you, no matter how hard you try to forget. If you found this story gripping, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications so you never miss out on more chilling stories and real-life mysteries. Your support helps me share more incredible content with you. Thanks for watching.